So hello everybody, good afternoon. This is our show and tell for Sprint 2 of the Digital Place-Based Engagement Project. Lead on is Camden on the project. We've got Middlesbrough working on the project, and Buckinghamshire Council have started to come on board and help out as well, which is really positive. We've also got a few other people who have expressed an interest, so we may get more partners as we go through it. But I think at the moment we've got a good group of councils there to help input in it, and also broadly at all different points in engagement processes and different points of digitization as well as planning services. So it's quite helpful. Quick overview of the project for anyone who doesn't know. It was awarded funding as part of the COVID-19 challenge by the local digital fund. The project's got two key outputs. First is Digital Place-Based Engagement Playbook, and this is really around we had been working to build up more digital platforms and tools in place-based engagement, predominantly in planning, but across the board as well, for a whole range of place-based services. And what happened with COVID was that we were obviously forced to make a lot more stuff go digital. We couldn't do face-to-face meetings anymore. Council meetings couldn't be held face-to-face. So we had to very quickly adapt and try and build new systems, change kind of how we use existing platforms, and try and be quite innovative and inventive in how we did that. And we have also worked with some private sector providers to sort of push how they deliver their services in response to it, which has been really positive. Bit of kind of co-working. And the challenge with all this stuff is that we've learned a lot from it, and we often do learn things from these kind of these rapid sprints of innovation. The problem is we don't tend to write them down a lot unless it's part of an actual project, and so that's quite an important bit of this project will be to kind of collate all the learning that we've done and all the different forms that we can use, how we use them, and to put that down in a playbook so others can access that and learn from it, and that we can learn from it too. There's an ultimate goal of that as well, to be able to think about maybe there's new ways that we can collect that information from residents to try and make it a little bit more standardized, perhaps easier to filter through and get data from. That will allow us to start to build a place-based profile so that one bit of consultation can inform another service area, for example. It doesn't have to be just that you're being informed by the consultation on that particular service or that particular scheme that you're consulting on. It can have a much broader approach. And then the second strand of that is digital planning notice, which sort of feeds into that. Digital notices, it was something that planning notices didn't get digitized in response to COVID. They've left as digital notices sitting on lampposts, and so we wanted to try and make sure that we can create a digital twin, for want of a better term, to allow people to still engage with planning, but actually we can use this richer environment, all these different platforms and tools, if we start to be a bit more kind of location-based, geographical information embedded in all of that consultation material. You can use the digital version to signpost people to other areas of consultation for their local area. So that's the second output, is a digital planning notice. So it's not been the quickest sprint, this one, and that's something that we'll look at in our review. Sprint review is about actually maybe we kind of took on a few too many tasks given the resources we've currently got, so we need to rethink that. But we're doing procurement, that's carrying on. We're now at evaluation stage, so we're getting close to that. Hopefully this will be the last sprint without a delivery partner, and then we'll be have an appointed partner who can work on the digital notice, so that element of it can progress a lot quicker. We have been looking at consultation requirements. We previously looked at the legal requirements for notices. We haven't really got round to doing a detailed review of the SCIs, so we're going to have to do that on the next sprint. But I think the idea of kind of how we're going to approach that, we've started thinking about that. And Kirsty, did you want to say a few words about about our kind of plans for that and how we intend to do that for the next sprint?
Yeah, I did try to put an additional slide in, so I'm not sure if it's there or not. Rich, I was trying to do it like in the last 10 minutes. I don't know if you can forward on one and we'll see if it's there.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically what we were going to do is look at sort of the SCI from different types of authorities. So in terms of their sort of locational contexts, are they urban, rural, coastal? Look at sort of the population mix that exists there and political backgrounds, and then highlight some key findings around kind of their general approach to consultation and what their vision is in terms of engagement, because a lot of these statement of community involvements have these sort of grand statements or a political forward or something at the start which talks about how they want to engage people in a meaningful way. And then it's actually how then that works in practice. And then the other thing is to look at sort of what aspects authorities say that they will and they may do in addition to those legal minimums. I know that a lot of authorities I've worked in previously, we didn't tend to overcommit ourselves in a statement of community involvement, but we would highlight some of the things that we might do if there was sort of time, capacity, if the actual project allowed. So it would be good for us to pick up some of those as well, so we can work out either through a playbook or the digital planning notice what potential add-on features we may need to sort of think about in the future. And then kind of like as an optional element was to try and contact the authorities and kind of look at their participation rates then. So in terms of the number of responses that they were receiving to some of these key consultation points, and also a demographic sort of representation. And what we were going to do is, rather than look at every consultation stage, we were just going to focus in on planning applications and sort of the big plan making consultations, rather than looking at every individual aspect to start off with. But again, we could broaden that out later. It was just trying to give us that feel and that overarching picture to start off with. And there's probably going to be about maybe sort of like 8 to 10 SCIs that we want to review, just to try and get that sort of spectrum across the board of different types of authorities and what's happening there.
Cool. Cheers, Kirsty. And another point to make was so Bucks have got to a point where there's a unitary authority now, and they are looking at their SCI, because they're starting to review their consultation engagement tools as part of their local plan. And Rosie, did you want to give us a bit of an overview as to what you're doing and where you are with all of that?
Hi, yeah, we're still very much at the start of the process. Buckinghamshire is a new council formed of the 5 former authorities in Buckinghamshire. So actually we need a brand new SCI. And of course, as part of that, we have been reviewing a number of SCIs, not only the legacy SCIs, but also SCIs that we think are sort of good practice at the moment. So that's interesting to see that you've also been doing that. Clearly, then we've also come from a different range of approaches and tools, from very much sort of handmade stuff, if you like, using access databases. One of our legacy authorities used Objective. Another of our legacy authorities used JDI, which is the same as Opus Consult and Opus Mapping. And we've just gone through an evaluation process whereby we want to look at what is the best way of managing consultation, or the most appropriate software for managing consultation for the future. And our evaluation is coming to favour Opus Consult, Opus Mapping, because we think it'll help us fulfil the vision set out in the planning white paper for community engagement. So that's where we're at. And also, I suppose I should say that our ambition for the SCI is that it should be a web page if at all possible. So I hope that's helpful.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah, so and obviously that I think the trend is for us to try and be getting things more and more as a digital platform, and having things like the SCI, and I know Bucks have been good at kind of getting their local application requirements online, not as PDFs, but as as kind of interactive web interfaces, and that's obviously what we're looking at, trying to provide a back end of that, a similar approach to this playbook, which potentially could help inform SCIs and so on that come forward in the future as well. So a bit more about the playbook. We did Eglay from the collaboration unit organised a meeting with where we joined up with a couple of the other playbook projects, and that was really useful actually, because we were looking at kind of where we align and where we're different. And I think what emerged from that was that the project that's being led by Leeds and Croydon, they've got quite a different angle on it, and I think it looks like our project would supplement that one quite well. Theirs is much more around kind of the real fundamentals of engagement and covering issues around, like, inclusivity, inclusion, and GDPR, kind of digital divide and things like that. Whereas ours is a lot more focused on tools and platforms. So I think they could work quite well together, and we're going to have some more alignment meetings further through the projects to try and meet up on that. The other point that was fairly interesting as well is that they're looking at the front end already, whereas that's something that we're probably going to leave and is not going to be part of our output unless we suddenly find ourselves kind of with loads of time left at the end, which is unlikely. But that they're already looking at kind of how to structure that information in a fair bit of detail. They've actually got a consultation up that they're looking for feedback at the moment, and I'll put some links to that in my sprint notes. But they've tweeted that, and we can see Sarah Lyle's there on the team on Twitter, so you can go onto her Twitter feed and find it. But I will put links to it in our sprint notes too. But what's helpful is that might potentially present a front end for us as well to be able to link into. And then we have been looking at these other kind of potential access for other platforms. So if we provide effectively structured information for the playbook, can we just make that open in a form that other people can tap into it? So, like I said, the Croydon and Leeds project has led on that. The MHCLG led project on the playbooks has not yet kicked off, but they are kind of, we're not totally sure on exactly what their output is going to be yet, but that's why we'll continue to have these alignment meetings, because it may be that they provide some kind of front end too, or maybe they don't. Maybe they do something similar to what we're doing. But either way, we can think about front ends. And for example, there's ones like GovLaunch, which is based in the US, but it's kind of an international resource and toolkit for digital innovation, and a lot of them are around engagement too, and they cover the UK, Australia, the US, a couple of other territories too, and in fact two members of our team kind of went off and spoke to them, and there's will be on their website. If you go on their website, you can kind of listen to a podcast about our project there as well. So there'll be kind of discussions potentially with other. We're looking at what these other kind of these other platforms for kind of connecting people into this information, and can we sort of facilitate that and use their resource to help us structure the information in our playbook. The other bit that we've done a fair bit of work on this week was George has led along with Nora as well, and Barry and our team on kind of who engages with planning. So we've been looking at a breakdown of demographics and so on, and I'll hand over to George now. I may dip in if there's anything that I need to add. But George, did you want to run through? I'll do the slides for you, and you want to kind of say a little bit about what you do to everybody, and then you can run through the information.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi, sorry I didn't turn my camera on earlier. Okay, so I'm George, I'm Mackenzie, and I'm a consultation community liaison officer for the Regeneration and Place team in place shaping. And what we do is that we produce planning guidance documents to regenerate specific areas in Camden. Now, these areas have been identified in the local plan for regeneration and growth, and to essentially provide more jobs and more housing. When we consult everybody in the area. So that's everybody who lives, works, visits, or have an interest in the area. Before we consult, we always do an equalities impact assessment, looking at people with protected characteristics in lowest super output areas, which cover the regeneration areas of focus. So what I'm going to talk about briefly is that we've done 2 recent-ish consultations. One recent one, sorry, the other one was quite recent-ish. And we did one for a planning framework for Kentish Town. And this was done pre-COVID and it ran for 6 weeks. And from October to December 2019, and I'm sorry, 2018. And not many residents live in the actual areas, so we focused on the lower super output areas surrounding the framework area. And the one I'm going to pick up on is the area, the south area, which is, the demographics across the board is quite similar. So for this one, it's important to mention that we were actually able to hold drop-in sessions as well, and we were able to go to visit a youth centre, visit a school, and leave paper questionnaires in libraries. And as a result, we had a larger sample of respondents than we had for the Camley Street consultation, which I'll quickly talk about. So for the Canal Side to Camley Street consultation, this ran during COVID and it ran for 10 weeks. And unfortunately, we were unable to run any drop-in sessions. We were unable to leave any questionnaires, paper questionnaires in the libraries because they were all closed. So it was a very different response rate than we had for Kentish Town. Just to finally mention about the consultations is that I'm going to be talking about people who responded to the actual questionnaires. We do get a lot of email responses. These are usually from local groups and statutory organisations as well. And finally, a significant amount of respondents did not provide any information at all. So even though I can pull out these figures, it's always good to mention that, that many don't like to reveal personal information about themselves. So just to briefly talk about, okay, so with regards to age, as you can see, it's probably best actually to move on to the next slide, please, Richard. Let's have a look. Yeah. Okay, so as you can see, with regards to them, we have slightly more females to males living in Camden, only a little bit, a very small percentage, and this is kind of reflected in terms of the numbers of people who responded. So there isn't really any significant change here. However, with regards to age, as you can see for both consultations, the Kentish Town consultation and the Canal Side to Camley Street consultation, we had a significant number of respondents who were aged 45 to 59 than any other age group. People aged 30 to 44 were very engaged, and also people aged 60 to 74 were also very engaged. 5 to 15s clearly, well, not clearly, but clearly 5 to 15s didn't get as engaged. However, for Kentish Town, as I said, we did visit a school and we were able to get feedback there. So we were able to tailor the conversation to suit that particular age group. But this is with regards to actually completing a questionnaire. The big standout age I would say here is age 16 to 29. Now, this is an age group that clearly can get online and can complete our questionnaires and maybe wouldn't need much guidance to be talked through what we're looking at. However, we tend to find that this age group don't get involved very rarely, and we really have to make a lot of effort to actually engage this group by actually going out, visiting youth centres, etc. So that's a bit, so more effort will need to be made there. And also just like to mention that for people aged 75 plus, for Kentish Town, you can see that we had a fairly good amount of respondents percentage wise. Sorry, this is really small what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the presentation here. But we did have a small number of respondents, but for Camley Street, we didn't have any respondents of this age group. And so I think it's quite good to mention that, we weren't able to that this was all done online, and that could partly be why this age group didn't get involved. Just next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so ethnicity. Okay, so most people in Camden are white British. And we had significantly more white British people respond to our consultations proportionally than we do living in the borough or than living in our areas of focus, like significantly more, like above that. We've got 128%. So that's something to really bear in mind. We also were able to get, okay, so we were able to get for Kentish Town, we were able to get some people who are non-white respond to our consultation, but I would say that's because we were on the ground and people were able to come and talk to us in the libraries. However, with regards to Camley Street, virtually no one who was non-white actually got online and responded. So that would definitely be something we would need to look into with regards to getting people to respond digitally. The next slide, please. I did want to mention, oh, sorry, can we go back just one slide? I think there was a little bit on disability there. Oh, I don't think it came on this slide, but
I think it's on the next one. Hang on. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, just talking about disability. So basically, the people with a disability or long-term illness is represented fairly well in our consultations, and you can see there's very little significant change. And with regards to the interest people have in a consultation, most people are local residents. A very high proportion of people are residents compared to businesses.
Yeah, you can see that here across both of them. It's really significant, that, isn't it? So resident involvement.
Yeah. What I did want to mention was yeah, I wanted to talk about employment, but also wanted to combine this with home ownership. I'll quickly mention home ownership first. I don't think there is a slide there. So actually there is. Yeah. So what I would like to say is that we find that a lot of people who talk to us or come to our events, and even who completed the questionnaire for Camley Street, most tend to have a financial investment in the area and will want to get more involved. And maybe that they feel more empowered to get involved. I would say this doesn't mean that people who don't have that level of investment don't want to get involved, but from the conversations we've had, a lot of people who are maybe social, rented, or renting in the area will feel less empowered to get involved. And many have spoken to us and say, well, our voice won't be heard as well. So I would say that, yeah, a lot of effort needs to be made to actually make sure we make it, all our consultations, socially inclusive across the board, so that we get better representation. With more historic consultations, when we've gone out with paper consultations, we would get a lot of involvement, well, some involvement from the TRAs and local resident groups. But I found with the more recent consultations, with the areas that we've looked at, very few TRAs or local resident groups got involved, and these groups would represent people in social housing and maybe on a lower income. So just tying that in with employment, okay, so there is an issue, and this conversation is, everyone's having this conversation on people being time poor, people not having the time to get involved, basically. And my experience so far is that most people are actually employed who get involved with our consultations. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't make more effort to make, more employed people get involved and to make it easier to get involved. But that tends to be a large majority of people who talk to us are people who with full-time jobs.
Cool. Oh yeah, there was this one of devices, which I thought was quite surprising.
Yeah. So with the devices one, we found that, so with the Camley Street consultation, we had it kind of, it wasn't separated. We incorporated into one consultation, but the way Commonplace is set up, it's kind of done into two areas: the map element and the themes element. So the themes element is where you provide information about the area, a build up, you talk about the history, etc., and people can understand what you're talking about, and you can engage them thematically. And the map is where they just literally look on the map and they will leave comments on the map. You'll ask them questions about the map, they leave comments. And we found that with regards to the themed questions, most people would respond on their desktop or a laptop. Whereas with the map, we had, you know, a small proportion of respondents respond via their mobile phone. So I would say this is something which is really, you know, interesting, and something to make it much more easier for people to respond using a mobile device. Just one final thing on this. I spoke about Kentish Town, I spoke about Camley Street, but just to mention that with Camley Street, we used a different consultation platform called Commonplace. With the Kentish Town one, we used a platform called We Are Camden. Both are online platforms, but just thought I'd drop that in.
Cool. Thanks, George. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think we've obviously shifted to Commonplace on quite a few things, and there are some obviously other platforms out there, and we've noticed while we've been kind of doing a bit of research for this project that there are quite a few growing in these areas, and you can see that some are teaming up with each other. Notice like View City doing embedding their kind of 3D content into Commonplace platforms. You've got one called Place Changes, which is something that I think we'll want to have a look at that and see if that's something that we can feed into the playbook too. So there is a discussion there around how much do we look at tools that we're not using, and I think certainly at the very least kind of flagging them as potential tools would be a really useful step.
I mean, the other thing to mention, Rich, is that there are a lot of tools that are out there. I mean, we mentioned that we are our Camden tool, which is something that was bespoke that we use, but obviously other authorities would use tools like Objective, formerly Limehouse, and, you know, Bang the Table is a new one that's coming out there. So there are quite a few different types of platforms that are not all around the map-based engagement tools. Some of them are more around kind of like forums, document presentation tools, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think the thing from there's sort of a difficulty there. I mean, it's something we're gonna just touch on now in terms of what we're doing next. Really, we're coming to the end of it, of the show and tell. So, in terms of the next steps that we're going to be looking at, finalising procurement. So hopefully that we'll have someone in place at the end of this sprint, which will be really good. We want to try and focus on writing the user stories for the playbook a bit, and focusing on LPAs, and this is where having a range of partners is really useful. You know, getting the viewpoint from kind of Middlesbrough and how they would want to access this information, as well as from Bucks, and then our viewpoint. It kind of gives that it starts to give us a kind of a rounder view to try and work out how we prioritize the user stories really into our final output. And then this point around noting other platforms, and like Kirsty says, there's quite a range out there. Like George pointed out, we use a few different ones, and I suppose the issue for us is how much do we just signpost those, because it's difficult without direct user experience for us to be able to maybe analyze it in the way that we will the other tools. So I think at the very least signposting it would be helpful, but it may be that we get some input from other authorities about what tools they're using. So that may be something we're going to look at some point, although probably not the next sprint. We'll be asking other local authorities to do a bit of a survey about what tools they use, and then effectively ask them to fill out our initial kind of our matrix that we did when we looked at what worked, how we use it, what didn't work, where the problems were, and what the kind of potential is. And then the other thing that we will work on this next sprint is to continue to build a list of or a pool of for user research, and that's really around ensuring that we have a database that we can go out to and ask and consult people on. And so I think these kind of projects are something we can do that with. But then there's the information governance question around can we tap into our database, for example, just for people who have submitted comments on planning applications, whether or not we're able to contact them directly, which could be helpful. But that's something we need to bottom out. But at the very least, we'll provide some kind of a survey response and then try and publicise that to try and get some involvement from that. So that's where we are, and that's kind of where we're going with the project. Has anybody here got any questions? Don't think I've been sent anything.
Emma has her hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to come in on that last bit about tools and whether to signpost and what to do, because obviously I come from a wider sort of overview than just the place-based. So I work across the organisation with different functions, and my experience has been from what we've used is that there is no one solution. It's very hard for one solution to do everything everybody needs it to, and there's actually a lot out there. And so when you do your survey of what people are using, it would be interesting to focus it on the kind of organisation wide rather than just the place-based stuff, because for example, in my role, looking at budgets and what tools we have and who needs what, it's a really complex minefield to navigate at the moment.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we'll need to discuss when we do it. So yeah, it'd be great to have your input on it, because we need to work out. You know, we want to. I guess the first output from us is to probably focus it. So that it's got this particular function in terms of place-based, but then we need to work out, well, what would the next steps be and how can we scale that? So yeah, trying to work out, like being able to see the bigger picture so that we can actually focus it down.
Just from my experience, I think even different people at different levels in the organisation, you have to remind them to start with what you need to achieve rather than let's look at tools straight away, because I think clarifying what's needed from each aspect of the organisation is really important.
Yeah.
Okay, that's Beth next.
Hi. It wasn't really a question. I guess it was a reflection on some of the data that you showed around where people were engaging and where they weren't. And I was just wondering, so it seems as though, like from the demographic data that we've got, that the people that aren't engaging are the sort of under 30s, people from sort of 16 to 29. And I just wondered how much of that was down to the fact that in London, it's hugely expensive to move out of your family home and sort of set up on your own. And actually you find that there are a lot of people that are still living with mum and dad into their 20s. I just wondered, you know, if we're sending consultations out, we're putting notes on lampposts and stuff, you know, if you're a early 20 something living at home with mum and dad, you're not engaging with it because you're assuming your parents are engaging with it. So I just wondered, you know, it's a bit like with the home ownership versus renting, you know, it's that kind of, it does seems to be, if you've got a financial investment in the area, you start to have an interest in what's going on, but if you don't, you're disengaged with it. And so yeah, I just wondered whether or not, I didn't know whether there's any way of us sort of delving in a bit more to understand why people don't get in touch, because it doesn't necessarily seem, you know, the people who actually probably are used to using digital technology and potentially looking at plans and things like that seem to be the ones that aren't really contacting us, which is, you know, so then it makes you question, well, what is the barrier to engagement? Is the barrier to engagement the way that we consult, or is it the fact that people still don't understand how much and how important the planning system is to influencing and shaping your area? I just, yeah, like we've always found, most people don't really know much about the planning system until they have to deal with it, and normally because it's not going in their favour or they want to build something. So it still feels as though maybe the biggest barrier to engagement is the fact that planning doesn't have the profile that it needs.
Beth, on that point, if I could just point out, because I'm doing Commonplace platforms at the moment for different aspects. So one of the pieces of work that I'm working on at the moment is around the future high streets, and we do have a Commonplace ideas map at the moment that's open, And certainly in terms of rates of participation, for people that have commented, we've had somebody that's in that 16 to 24 mark, but we've also had 18% of respondents who are in 25 to 34. So I think it really is a good point around making the material relevant to people and making them understand that actually, you know, there is an opportunity here to have an influence. And even if you're not maybe a homeowner or somebody who has a financial interest in the area, it's still really important that you engage with it, because it's going to have that longer impact. And sometimes I think that's not always clear. And I always tell people, you know, when I was 18, I went to university to do planning. Lots of my friends thought I was doing party planning because they didn't realise that town planning was a thing. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of raising the profile around sort of planning, what planning means, what it does, and kind of the spatial impact then that these proposals have, not just in terms of the way a place looks, but how it functions in your quality of life.
That's really interesting, Kirsty. Yeah, I agree.
And then finally, Rosie is the last person with a hand up.
Hi, thank you. A couple of naive questions from me, but might be helpful for my colleagues that are along as well, because we're quite new to this. Just to understand a bit more about what user stories are, and what would the Playbook product look like? What does it look? What will it look like as a deliverable?
So, well, the first point on what does it look like, that is a question we haven't yet totally decided. Although what we're thinking is at the moment, it's probably we're not going to worry about a front end. So we're not going to particularly worry at this stage, at least, about it being a nice kind of a wiki style web page or anything like that. One of the other digital projects, the one that's led by Leeds and Croydon, they are looking at that front end, and so actually there's an opportunity there potentially for us to use their front end for it, depending on exactly how they structure it. So we'll continue to have those discussions with them, but I think from our point of view, what we want as the first stage output from this project is to think about how to structure the information so that it's accessible, and that could effectively just take the form of, like a basic database spreadsheet, whatever, as long as it's publicly accessible, and as long as it allows you to kind of filter and find the things you need based on the criteria you need. That's sort of what leads into the user stories. So the idea behind the user stories is about putting kind of the user at the center of it. Now, the users for this are going to be predominantly LPAs, local planning authorities, and within that, though, there will be different users, and that's something that we're going to be looking at this sprint. And what you do is you effectively you look at each user and you try and define the different tasks that user does, and therefore the different needs that come from it. So, for example, if you're a planning officer and you want to go out to consultation on a planning application, so say it's a major and you've got a pre-app phase, and you want to do some pre-application engagement with the community, you may have particular needs about how you want to do that. So it may be that you have to use a digital platform, you want to involve a certain number of people, and there may be a way in which you want to find out the information, and so you write that story, which is effectively a user need. It's just another term for a user need. So it may be, for example, like as a planning officer, I need to know which tools I can use to deliver an open forum with more than 40 people in attendance to demonstrate videos and things like that. And then and then you could search for that. It may be that in fact you would rather search by things around demographic. So like George was saying, around all the different demographics and things, inclusivity. Maybe you want to target a particular group. Maybe you're looking at a policy consultation where a particular group is more important to get their view because you've already got the views of another group. Mm-hmm. So maybe you want to go and find out what that group is. So when we do that, when we sort of build those user needs, we can then start to think that will shape how we present the information, mm-hmm. and what that could look like.
That's really helpful. So I think what's coming up in my head from where you're talking is something like a matrix of these are the tools and these are the these are the things they can do, or the ways you can deploy them.
Exactly, yeah. On a very basic level, I don't, it doesn't need to have all the bells and whistles on it. I think it just needs to serve like a useful function, really, and give everybody some pointers and useful learning points. So the key thing really is around how do we structure that? Like, what does that matrix look like? Not physically, what does it look like? Anyone can build a nice fancy website to plug into it, but how does it look like in terms of what things do we
want to know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's something that we will kind of workshop in the next sprint and try and refine those user stories so we get a clearer idea.
Thank you for explaining that. That was really useful. And is there somewhere where the overall sort of objectives and program for this work stream are set out?
So we've got a website which kind of outlines it on the MHCLG's website. Eglo's put together a kind of a project website on there, so we will provide updates to that. We publish sprint notes, and we'd welcome other people to kind of publish their own kind of thoughts and involvement in this progress as well. And then what we're doing is we have a couple of different resources which we kind of will try and make public as we go along, where we're workshopping a lot of these things, like where we've mapped impact of different engagement tools, for example. We do those on tools like Miro, things like that, which are online collaboration tools. So there's just a way of us sort of, okay, well, once we've got that, everybody involved in it, and I'll invite you to these as well, can gain access to these. But then actually we want to find a way of still publishing that so we can put those out with our sprint notes and things like that so everyone can access it.
Thank you very much.
Nobody's got any more hands up, Rich.
Cool. All right, well, if that's it then, we will see you for another show until in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully we'll be at the point where we'll be able to say we've got a delivery partner, fingers crossed. And we'll be able to progress the notices side of it too. And obviously, if you are looking at this and you feel like you can input, even if it's just to do like survey questions or something like that, if you just register an interest with us, we've got an account on Twitter, Digital Planning at Digital Plantech, which is on Twitter, and we will be setting up an email address too. But if you go onto our MHCLG website, then there's some links on there, and what we'll do is we'll publish that link to that website along with the YouTube video.
The email address is live now, Rich. So it's digitalplanning@camden.gov.uk. So please get in touch.
Great. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. See you later.